we did do another double feature. So you are getting episode 4 and episode 5. And to kick things off with episode 4, let's talk about the Fanson.
Oh,
I don't. Okay, now they are blending in together, 205 and 204. But what happened in 204 with them?
So this is a whole thing where everyone is having a crisis because they think they're going to die. So George makes her sister be a waitress at the restaurant. And so Nick pulls George back from the ledge and is just like, I need you to know that I love you because you need to know that someone loves you. And it felt as if, okay, we're here, especially in the context of, I don't know if y'all caught the line with her sister Jessie, but it's only been a month since the blood bucket. So where he has
oh wow. Oh.
So he's with Nancy. They broke up. He was sad about Nancy, got with George. They revealed their relationship, and now we're at I love you. It could only have been 2.5 weeks at the most.
Wow.
That's wild when you put it like that. But I will say, again, the Winchesters picked a very bad week for its finale. It didn't feel like it had some stakes that it should have. And I will say credit to the Nancy Drew writing team, because
Thanks.
even with the fact that we are feeling a little front loaded and a little rushed here, you felt the stakes. You understand why someone feels the need to say I love you, like right before a life or death situation. And between these two episodes, the life or death situation was high.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely was. They had us feeling that in both of the episodes. You're right. It does blend together in terms of like, I feel like you can't talk about 4 without talking about 5. But the context for why Nick tells George that he loves her, I thought was beautiful, because she is someone who did not hear it before. So to have someone say it to her, and yes, in the context of we are gonna die, but also, you know, that like you need to hear it. Not to mention, we don't do the typical, she doesn't say it back and then he gets in his feelings and then we have to spend the rest of the episode where she comes to terms with being able to say, I love you. He just like, you know what? I love you more for not being able to say it back. It's on brand for you. We'll just wait.
I am kind of like reserved on Nick and George, because I don't think it needs to be the exact polar opposite of his relationship with Nancy for us to like understand the relationship. But I think it would be a little bit more helpful, like that scene where Nancy finds the ghost vision goggles and Nick was like the engineer of them, and she's like, when did you get so into this? And he ends up saying like, you never asked. And I'm thinking like, do we see George asking those questions about him? I'm not sure that it's like is George providing the like the attention that Nancy did not give to him to make this relationship different? I think that was a question I had in 204 with that moment in particular. But I was also like, why are we still shaming Nancy about the place she was in her relationship with Nick? Like, why is she still catching strays? As much as she might deserve them, I was like, I don't think we need to continue to unpack Nick and Nancy's relationship with slights, comparing it to maybe even George's relationship with him. I don't know. That scene was really loaded to me when that line was so cutting. I loved it.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. It was such a cutting line for Nancy to confront, like, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't ask you any personal questions about you because I was too consumed with my own stuff. But just largely looking at the relationship's big picture, I was like, what are we getting at here with continuing to make Nancy face this? Like, is it any different in his new relationship? That was the big question I had in 204. And
it does feel that she's grown a lot. She still has her issues, and that's fine. She's been through a lot. She's dealing with them. But yeah, maybe it's just because Nick's such a nice character. I was like, oh, that was mean all of a sudden. And I know,
I mean, he was honest too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the truth can hurt and everything, but it did feel like that. Not that they'd gotten past it, but they were moving through it. And then that suddenly felt like a throwback. And we'll get to the argument they all have in the 5th episode right before it all goes down. I know tensions are running high and everything, but it felt like, why would you say that? I don't know. I know what you mean. It's hard to make with the comparison with George because we don't get to see as much time of them on screen. The show devoted an awful lot of time to Nick and Nancy at the start, and it is yet to do that with Nick and George. It's getting there, but it's yet to do it. Yeah, it just, that kind of, wow, took me out. And I know tensions are running high, but Nancy's just doing what she can to save y'all's lives. Give her a break.
Yeah. Well, also because I think the when George does ask a question on screen, and it does happen in the previous season, she asks after he says something that would make you ask a question. So she did it. Nancy has, it's the same context. You did a thing that she wasn't aware that you were able to do, and therefore she asked about it. Even as a Drewson shipper, I do have to say, and this, it does have to do with episode 5 as well. Nancy and Nick need to unpack their relationship away from everybody else. Because at this point, because I'm like, well, more so with Nick, because Nick clearly has some baggage that he and Nancy need to talk through personally, where nobody else can see, hopefully off screen, because stop it. Like, I love them, but as like, you decided to move on, I don't think you get to like keep, she should not keep catching strays over things that you have yet to bring to her attention about your feelings about them. I love him, but like, sir, you're with George now. We need to like, and they always have like George be very understanding. I was like, you need to ask him some questions about how he feels about Nancy, because we're a little still too raw.
Yeah, we're tiptoeing around that, George. I think maybe we need to heal. We all need to heal.
Yes.
Pull up the red table for these 3.
Yes. So this whole like this 2-episode arc though was about healing as well. They gave us a very emotional story for Odette, which they started seeding in the in episode 4. That whole sequence with Agnes in the basement to try to figure out what's going on down there, the fact that she's trapped in the basement, still living through the trauma of being locked away and then being told that she's going mad when everyone knows that she's not, when she knows that she's not, so therefore she does end up going mad. My heart broke for Agnes. Agnes wasn't doing anything but enjoying some jewels she didn't realize that she got through murder.
My goodness, the way that story came about. And I feel like this show has done such a good job with its compelling storylines, but it leans very easily into the whole horror sequencing as well. And that their scene of Nancy and Bessa down in the cellar where they couldn't get out, horror movie 101. It was terrifying at times. And sometimes when a show does the emotional story, which is done with Lucy, it can also play very well with the more fun, one-dimensional side of villains, and it's done that in the past as well with some of the demons or whatever they fought. I honestly thought the Aglaeca was going to be that, so the fact that they've managed to come up with such a like deep and powerful backstory that makes you feel so much for her in such a short space of time. Again, credit to the writing team, because even though you're like, oh, go away every time the Aglaeca showed up, you're always like, oh, when you find out why she became that, if you know what I mean.
I know I took some shots at the Aglaeca last week. So I do kind of still stand by, which like Aglaeca, just mind your business, girl. But I do like how heavy and deep the storyline is. It kind of makes sense because this show does such a careful job at unpacking the generational trauma in this town that is so connected. And I think there's a larger metaphor if I were to really get like intelligent about it and like write a college thesis paper, be like something about like how this show has a metaphor about like trauma and all of the ghosts and demons in this town. There's something really, really, really rich below the surface in the subtext in the show. And I think after the Lucy stuff and now with the Agnes, Odette, Aglaeca, it's like, wow, they're really telling such a powerful story that is still fun to watch and not completely devoid of any levity or joy. They're trying to say something. They're trying to tap into things that do have very real roots in our countries around the world. That's probably giving the story way too much credit. It's not that deep, but the stories are deep and they go really deep. And there's this trauma that's coursing in every corners of this town, and it affects all of these characters at this little seafood diner. it's when you like really piece it together and look at it all, it's like, wow, it all impacts all of them in such shocking and striking ways.
It does. It seems like Nancy Drew is very much about the power of stories, your personal story, and how that can be changed by other people and outside influences. And yes, sometimes by people's perceptions of you, but in this case, when it comes to a lot of these ghosts, it has to do with the way that they are dehumanized in their death. and like people steal from them. I love the moment where Nancy like disrupted I guess he's not a historian, but the tour guide who has one vision of how history went and thinks that any other facts are irrelevant. And she's like, they're not. She was not. First, she wasn't that man's wife. Second, she did all these other things that have nothing to do with him. He's like, oh, cute factoid. And I was like, it's not a factoid. It's the truth. And you should know more about Odette. Or like,
I kind of love that character, and I hope he comes back for him and Nancy to lock horns again in like season 3 for just like another episode, because their dynamic was so fun.
Yes.
He was exasperated with her. He's like, but perhaps you will actually go read some more materials.
And then he thought she was disrupting his tour, but then all the people were like, oh, look, it's the true crime girl. Love that.
Oh, but I will say something about like, where you can see the plot. So like the fact that the book isn't behind a case, the hymnal, like it's a very old
just put
hymnal.
it down and left the room. And it's like, Nancy's smarter than you, guy.
It's just sitting there, so no one's ever stolen that hymnal ever. It's not behind a lockbox. Like
he deserved it at that point.
He did. But he'll have to come back at some point. We're always working with the Historical Society as it is. So she will be back for this man's information that she will question and also provide him more facts with. But I do think that, like, to go back to like generational trauma or and truths that are uncovered, it was really nice how they've done a very slow means of having Nancy heal, but also letting her dads be a part of this adventure, but not with her, with Ace. Like, so the road trip between Ace and her 2 dads, fantastic.
Per Ace. He thought that was such a good idea at the start, and then being stuck in that awkward silence. I love the fact he said, let's play a game, and what if about the farmer and his chicken. And like, they really ran with the metaphor, and I think Yes didn't think it worked, but I think some of that got through to the two of Carson and Ryan. But yeah, Ace is a genius. We love Ace.
I can't remember now if the conversation between Ryan and Carson happened in 4 or 5, but that they do have this one conversation. I think it was in 205 now. I don't know. We'll find out when I say it. When they finally kind of like realize like, oh, we have a common goal, and that common goal is to care about Nancy. So like anything that happened in the past probably should not be continued to be dredged up and hurt this girl anymore. Like, we can have our differences and keep that, like, but just like put the weapons down. White flag. We both care about this girl, and that's all that should matter. And I thought that was a really powerful and nuanced scene. It didn't hit us over the head. I at least I didn't feel like it was like whacking me over the head with like a quick, like, we need to get these guys to be friends. I don't think they are friends, but I thought that was something very necessary and crucial to Nancy, as you said, come into her own healing about this. Like, even that scene she has with Carson where she's like, I don't like you right now, but I need you and I do love you. And eventually I'll catch up with the feeling that I'm feeling now, but I just need to exist in that moment where everything was okay.
So the scene that you're talking about with Ryan and Carson, that is 204. It comes after they have that argument about where Ryan calls himself her real father, and Carson says to be a father, you have to actually be a father. So then Ryan thinks about that. Carson apologizes actually because he took something from Ryan. And so that, I think, is the catalyst for why Ryan will speak to Nancy, and they have that lovely moment where he lets her be abrasive because that's kind of just a part of her personality, but he helps her solve the puzzle. And she admits that, yeah, I am actually mildly interested, which we know she's more than mildly interested in learning about Ryan. And they have that lovely moment together. This show is just so good, letting Nancy feel how she feels, and then slowly working the story toward her being able to be in a place where she can open her heart, at least crack the door for both of her dads. It was really great. And Ryan was helpful. He apparently reads music and she didn't need him after that. Like, once he said it was musical notes, she dismissed him. But it was just nice.
She was like, yeah, we're all done here for now.
I know. Bless him. He was so happy that he was able to offer up some kind of assistance, because I feel like sometimes he's always a bit overwhelmed by how smart these kids are, and he feels a little bit like they're just coming to him because he's got influence or that he has money or whatever, but he never like gets involved in the nitty gritty of it. And so it was nice to see that, but also how it was also impressive how like quickly he pivoted from yes I helped to ringing Carson and saying okay, something's definitely going on here, we need to solve this problem. And they use humor very well, because the whole Ace situation in the car suddenly turned into Ace not being able to answer his phone on time, so they put Nancy on speaker, and then they're like what? And that's when they figured out there was something clearly wrong there. So yeah, it was, and I think that's what ultimately forced them to work together. It's such a unique dynamic, because we did say how Ryan suddenly turned into this like great like soap villain, or like I'm going to use this all against you if I want to, but at the same time he also wants to be a realistic father. And so where do you meet in the middle with that? And I feel like this episode kind of did that well, because they had the little like stupid argument at the start, and then they realized, hold on, we can actually help this girl here, and then that bleeds very nicely into the next episode when they're literally following her.
Yeah, so we should just jump to 205, because that car sequence where it gives you insight into Ryan's character too, and how his sense of how to be a parent is completely warped thanks to his own parents. Because he casually was like, yeah, my dad hired a PI to follow me around. He's like, that's not normal. Oh, well, I'm like, my dad like that had initiative to trick, like to pay the PI. And he's like, I'm gonna get you some parenting books. Like we're gonna fix this. But they aren't friends, but it is nice to see that they are very much like, look, we are the parents in her life. We have to figure this out. We're going to protect Nancy. So we're going to tolerate each other. But in tolerating each other, you can kind of see that they're seeing more sides to one another than they had previously. I think that Carson is really seeing how much Ryan probably would have been in Nancy's life had he been given the opportunity.
It was very much an uneasy alliance at the start, and it's still kind of like that, but it feels like it's becoming a little bit easier of an alliance the longer it goes on, if that makes sense. It feels like they're finding common ground and working through it, and I think that's been a running theme with this show in general. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how they balance this kind of new normal. I'm sure they'll end up butting heads at some point again in the future, probably many times, but it's just they're becoming very useful in their own ways to Nancy without even realizing it. And I think as she starts to like care about Carson again, realize that, understand why he did what he did, and then grow to care about Ryan, it's going to be really interesting to see how that dynamic develops.
Nancy continued to get confronted with difficult truths when the whole gang, I feel like we had been growing to this point. Like it didn't feel like it did kind of feel like it came out of nowhere, but when I thought about it, I was like, no, they've been feeling this quietly, secretly, probably for the duration of the series. Like you have to stop and realize like, oh, we're in this mess because of this person. Like she's the catalyst for the Aglaeca. She got us mixed into this. As much as we made our own choices to be involved, like we're still like, we have a death clock running because of a decision she ultimately made. And I think there's a fairness to it and there's an unfairness to it. And Nancy does what she does best. And she's like, no matter how you feel, I'm still going to save your lives as best as I can. And it was kind of hard to watch them all fall apart like that.
Yeah, I thought it was unfair because they did make their own decisions, at least in terms of like the Aglaeca. Like if there had been a situation in which Nancy was told not to do something and she did it anyway, I could understand. But I was like, I know this has gotta, like you said, Reed, have been brewing. And obviously with the death clock, like ticking down to zero, there isn't time for reflection on that. There's only time to point the finger and assign blame to the person that y'all are always looking to for answers in the first place, because she's like, even so they did all that, and then I think then she's like, I think it was Bess, late when something didn't work out, she's like, now what, Nancy? I was like, okay, but you were yelling at her at the top of the episode.
Yeah, to see Bess get involved, I'm like, you're usually the peacekeeper, the one that's like, we all need to stay together. I'm like, Bess, come back.
It's been interesting to watch all of their dynamics develop, but Nancy's kind of gone from this like lone warrior to kind of like the reluctant leader of the group. And now as the series has gone on, it's less reluctant. She gets things done regardless, and she does look after them, even if she doesn't always like wear her heart on her sleeve in the way that maybe Bess would. But so it was still kind of hard to see them all suddenly turn on her, because she waded away into that conversation to try and be the peacekeeper that she somehow turned into, and then they all kind of turned on her. And I don't think there was no side of that like quadrant of them that didn't like throw an insult at one another, and it really worked because the tensions were running high, as like that the cracks were starting to show. Fear was making them do horrible things, but I think they never really like fully apologized for it. But I think the reason it worked so well is because it nicely led into how even in their final moments, they were the four people they wanted to call up and talk to when they thought they were going to die. They didn't need to apologize for it, because they knew that within this last however many weeks or months, they had become each other's people, and they were the family they wanted to spend those last few moments with.
Bess said they're family.
Yes.
She said what I wanted them to say, but then George denied her hug, and I was like, George, come on, do it for
me. Just one hug. But no, that whole sequence was very lovely, and of course it started because Bess made the phone call. I like the conference call that they're all on, which still has like a tension in it, but there's such a beautiful vulnerability with Nancy, as you can hear the tears as she's like talking to them. And I'm like, I know you're not gonna apologize, but I want everyone to apologize to Nancy, because even if there was some truth in there, like she didn't deserve all of that. But I guess it was necessary, even though out of everybody, Nick and Nancy do need to like have a conversation off to the side about some things, because I don't think their relationship was all about her mom's grief, but I mean, her grief over her mom, but okay.
Ace saying that, I was like, Ace, that was kind of okay.
Well, it was insightful. Like, it wasn't even, he didn't even say that with like malice behind it. He was like, this is what happened.
He laid it out plainly, and I was like, okay, Ace, see you.
He's like, let's just get to the root of the problem. But it just was, their connection is lovely, and I am glad that they said that they're their family. And I was gonna say there was a hug. It wasn't one George wanted, but Nancy gave it. I think the whole sequence at the end, not to skip past Nick like tricking the Aglaeca, but the whole sequence at the end, where they find out it's love that they need to use in order to defeat the Aglaeca, and they read her letters to did they name the English woman?
Oh, I don't think so. Did they?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. Well, the love Odette had for the English woman with no name, that was their means of being able to bring her back to the person. I love that they separated Odette from the monster that the Aglaeca is, that it was betrayal and suffering and how she died that turned her into a monster, but she herself is not. And then they are all just yelling yelling quotes from her love letters at her, even in French for Nick. And that is how we get to Odette, though I'm so sorry to George in her stomach, because getting impaled by the harpoon was just...
That scene was shocking, but the acting, the whole cast, when Nick was like, stay back, I was like, oh, we're acting. Acting with a capital ting. Like, I was like, it's usually we're going off about Kennedy, but it was like really the whole cast. Like Madison, that's Bess's real name in real life. She's usually the one with the quick quips on the side, but she was, every cut to her just losing it. I was like, oh, we can always see how we feel through Bess, because she's like she's our eyes and ears of any character. She and Ace are like our eyes and ears, and just see them fall apart.
I know.
Oh my God, it was an intense sequence. That one hurt.
The length to which Nancy went to go save George, granted, that is what's going to set off the next part of the plot, because in her desire not to lose her friend, she didn't care about anything about those lock boxes and just turned off the electricity and stole that shroud. But she brought her back. I think I love that the amount of love in the room was transcendent. Like, they're all love George, and so they're all having an emotional reaction to her. Ace trying to help Nick, and Nick not being able to be allowed help because he's just emotionally gone. That Nancy running into the room, still crying, throwing the shout over her and crying on George when she thought it didn't work, and then hugging her. Like once George wakes up, she's like, ugh. Okay, no. I was like, girl, you were dead.
Or just like, what did I miss? But you just felt utterly exhausted watching that scene just because of how utterly exhausted by grief they were. Just, oh my goodness.
That day on set must have been
right.
Crazy.
Oh man. It's just like, it felt endless. And we've seen episodes after this. We knew George shouldn't die, but like in that like a moment you genuinely believed she had. And it's just like everything we talked about, Stargirl wrapping everything up, everything, the blood bucket, it all came to pass in this one episode. You were just like, they didn't overcome it. Nancy found a way around it, but they didn't overcome it in the end. And I also think that was such an important like character moment for Nancy, because the mission has always been her priority. And even though the mission was technically over at this point, logic or nothing played into this, she was going to save George. She had started seeing the people throughout her whole journey here. And now she didn't care about anything else other than saving her friend. And that was so, so powerful. And I just thought that was such a great moment for her and just great development for the show in general.
And it does kind of tie into what their fight was about, because their fight was like, the risks, but you still called to the Aglaeca and you put us in this position. And then again, like, she knows the risks because the woman at the historical society told her, like, we don't know what kind of like darkness these things can unleash. Like, we're not just gonna open them up and tinker around with them. Like, we're like this, they're back there for a reason. So Nancy kind of knows the risks of putting the shroud on George and bringing her back to life, but she is willing to take that risk again, because I think she could have done two things. She could have just been like, if we let George die, this could all potentially be over officially. And I think that when she doesn't make that choice, she's hopeful that the risks will not outweigh the reward of bringing George back and not ending their story like that. So, yeah, I'm curious to see how they react to the aftershocks of this decision that Nancy made without, again, consulting them.
Yeah, well, especially because it seemed like in her panic, and then the relief of George being back, she forgot about what was said about not knowing what the consequences would be of that action. It seems like one of the consequences is that Odette is still around, and perhaps George is possessed by her. She couldn't speak a lick of French.
And she's singing it, and then Odette's in the mirror, but she's in the mirror after George walks away. So I was curious about that. Like, is she in the mirror?
Well, with that, wasn't it Mac? That character was trapped in the mirror at one point in the show. So I feel like there's definitely little teases and references to what we saw previously in the season. But what I was going to say was, I keep going on about how this season got ended prematurely, or the first season got ended prematurely. And you're like, where was the original end point of that season going to be? Was the Aglaeca going to turn into the big bad after they solved the Lucy's murder? Because it was very much just like unintentionally genius timing that the season ended just as they solved Lucy's murder, but that was not the initial plan. The season was supposed to go on for longer. So would this have been the original finale? Because all I got throughout that entire episode was finale feelings. Not only did they like meet the George blood bucket destiny, they tied up the Aglaeca issue. The Aglaeca is no longer the primary threat. And then we leave the episode with that little teaser. Love the teaser by the end of Nancy turning around to the camera. I was like, did you hear that?
Nancy, who are you talking to, girl?
She broke the fourth wall. It was great.
Did she look at us? I couldn't tell.
She's looking at us. Like,
Wow.
it's her eyes are a little off though, so I was wondering as well, but I think she's looking at us.
That would have been a great season one finale. You know what I mean? So I feel like that could have worked as a season one finale, because whatever goes on from here, the worst case scenario is going to be aftermath of what happened before. I do feel like the Lucy and Aglaeca storylines for the most part have been wrapped up. So I feel like this was where season 2 was supposed to start. And that leaves me like, if we've technically a clean slate now, we don't know which one of these demons or monsters could be the main story, or is this where the villain of the week thing will come in? Will we see more of them throughout the season?
That does make sense, Michael, because this season has 18 episodes and this is 5. If you subtract 5 from 18, you get 13. Right? I did the math right?
Yes. So this could have been the next.
Season 1 was 18. If you add 5, that's 23. I don't know. The maths at some point.
Well, they would have, so they probably 204 and 205 would have happened. That would have been one episode. And so some of the scenes would have been condensed down or probably entirely removed. So that would have been fine. They would have still ended up with 22. But I do think, I think the math is mathing, that is where we would enter to season 2. Before we leave for Shubei, though, to go to our toast, I do want to mention that Ace made a call to the person in witness protection, and he thinks that he's their brother. So that's going to be an interesting story plot.
Yeah.
Very much so. We don't know much about Ace. We don't really know that much about his family. But again, that feels like another one of those great season 1 cliffhangers that would be carried on in season 2. So I feel like we're going to learn more about Ace, and I think all 3 of us are totally on board with that.
Absolutely.
Yes, I'm on Hardy Boy watch now, just to see whether or not he ends up being a Hardy Boy. We'll see by the end of the series.